If you were watching anime in 2015, you witnessed the rise of a juggernaut. One Punch Man wasn't just another seasonal hit, it was a cultural moment. Alongside Attack on Titan a few years earlier, it pulled anime into the mainstream in a way few series ever had. The hype was everywhere online, in the classroom, in memes, and for a while, One Punch Man felt unstoppable. Nearly 10 years later, the conversation around the series feels very different. So what happened? How did one of the most exciting anime debuts of all time end up here? This is the meteoric rise of One Punch Man. This monumental journey begins with one guy who was creating a webcomic for fun using nothing but a normal computer, using a mouse to draw a quick story that he thought would be interesting. And he posted it on his own personal website so that he could show it to people he thought might be interested. The site was hosted on Natosha, a Japanese webcomic site. This is something he did to simply share it with the people he knew, his friends and family. The chapters were insanely inconsistent though, and he would work on a page-to-page basis, uploading pages at a time rather than entire chapters. The art was nothing to marvel at. It was extremely rough and overall unappealing. However, trickles of people started to read his comic, most likely from other Japanese internet forums who had just so happened to stumble across it. Little did this man know what he had created. This one man's life was going to change forever. The name of the creator of the one comic is One, if that wasn't clear by the little reference I did before. And he was starting to feel fatigued with the amount of shonen stories out there. How these characters overcome stronger enemies, always seeming to come out on top for some unearned reason or power-up, consistently devastating any stakes these stories had. But instead of rant and complain about this in a letter to Shonen Jump, he decided to take action in a more creative route, creating his own webcomic, which by its very concept was a subversion and opposition of all those tropes he had grown so tired of. The very first chapter of the webcomic tells you everything you need to know about the tone and the setting of the entire story. A primordial evil created from all the pollution and harm that humans have done to the earth has manifested into a destructive being ready to reap its revenge on all of humanity for what they have done to Mother Nature. It gets blown into chunks by a guy who looks so disappointed. It's as if he just swatted away a fly. This was it. This was why it works. Saitama, much like a normal shonen protagonist, is insanely strong. It just so happens that this strength isn't a strength to him. He has grown so agonizingly bored with how easy things are that he started to question everything. Once stayed anonymous, only interacting with fans through short update notes. This mysterious vibe added intrigue. People were curious. Who could make such a compelling story with such minimal presentation? It was for three reasons that gained it so many loyal readers, despite all the things going against it. The lack of official publication, the amateur visuals, and the poor accessibility. Readers were able to look past it all because what lay within was so overwhelmingly refreshing and relatable to the average viewer. This passion must have been infectious because at its peak, the webcomic was pulling 20,000 views a day, and it had fan translations circulating by 2011. And by 2012, the webcomic had over 7.9 million hits on one's site. Not too bad for a comic spread only by word of mouth. Let's not gloss over those numbers though. They are crazy for an amateur Japanese webcomic artist, especially for the time. The industry standard for an indie series was maybe 10,000 total readers, not nearly close to one's 7.9 million. This success and overall quality of writing attracted more than just fans and readers. It also gained the attention of a very talented manga artist. We moved to Madagai City in the Madagai Prefecture to a man who just so happened to come across the webcomic. He fell in love with the story and the world, and this gave birth to an ambition. Because this man was Yusuke Murata. But let's go back first. We don't know too much about One, because he's very secretive. The same cannot be said Murata. Murata was always destined to be a mangaka. From a young age, he was obsessed with drawing, and he cited the great Akira Toriyama, rest in peace, as his main inspiration. As early as elementary school, he was already submitting illustrations to contests held by Capcom for some of their Mega Man games. His drawings were chosen multiple times and featured in instruction manuals for Mega Man 4, 5, and 6, giving him the first hit of the drug that was creating manga. While in high school, he was constantly taking part in weekly Shonen Jump manga competitions, and his first major award was in 1995 when he won the Hop Step Award, a competition for up-and-coming manga artists. Even from a young age, his work exceeded that of his peers. However, anything he created himself had one key issue. He always struggled to create longer narratives on his own, a skill he wouldn't need when it came to his first big break, Eyeshield 21. He teamed up with Richiro Akane, a talented writer, and with that shortcoming covered, the manga had a powerful springboard to jump from. The manga ran from 2002 to 2009 in Weekly Shonen Jump and lasted 333 chapters, this making 37 volumes. Insane! It sold over 20 million copies and even received an anime adaptation. For this video, I read 30 chapters of Eyeshield 21, and I have to say, even the early chapters, Murata's artwork is spectacular. I've read a lot of sports anime, like Ippo, Croak No Basket, Haikyuu, but this was genuinely on a different level when it came to the artwork. It was dynamic, detailed, and fluid like water. However, despite his talent, after Eyeshield 21 ended, Murata struggled with what to do next. He had a prodigy level of skill when it came to his art, but still struggled with longer narratives, a skill he never learned when working on Eyeshield 21. And after the failure of Dawn 10 Prism Solar Car, what a title. It was a short-lived manga he was working on with another writer, but he was lost and hopeless, considering retirement, as he stated publicly. It was around this time, in 2011, where Murata found One's webcomic, and Murata's new ambition was born. He loved the story and saw an opportunity. Recognizing that One lacked the refined art style, he reached out and said, "Your story is amazing, but many readers may overlook it because of its art. I would love to redraw your series and bring it to a bigger audience." What makes this moment even more touching is that at the time, Murata was recovering from health problems. He said he was so inspired by One's story that it genuinely gave him a reason to keep creating manga. One was cautious when considering Murata's offer. He was already working on Mob Psycho 100 with Shogakua, but Murata's skill as an artist was undeniable. Murata could take the webcomic to the mainstream, and maybe to the rest of the world. Because of this, he decided to strike a deal. One would provide the storyboards and rough draft of the generational story, and Murata would do his thing, making those storyboards into works of art. The plan was set, and the world wasn't ready for what came next. The first chapter of the One Punch Man remake was published online, and the reception was instant and completely overwhelmingly positive. Fans of the webcomic were amazed by the quality of the art. The story they loved was now portrayed at a quality they could have never imagined One's humble webcomic to ever be. Not only was the first volume of the remake insanely loyal to the webcomic, being in all ways a straight-up upgrade from the original, this change in art took on the desired effect and drew new readers and captivated by One's refreshing story with one hell of a new gloss of paint. There was some turbulence on this rocket though. One of the issues the two ran into was preserving One's comedic timing while also amplifying the action. In regards to this, Murata said, "If I was to make it cool, I'll ruin One's humor. If I make it funny, I'll ruin the epic battles. My job is to amplify both at the same time." However, there was not many complaints, and by late 2012, the manga was pulling millions of views online. The manga was going international. Unofficial translations spread quickly around the world. Again, Murata and One would become even more famous, as did Murata's habit of going all out. On the early chapters, spending an excessive amount of time, even when these deadlines loomed over him, adding insane levels of details on monsters and architecture. He would re-upload new revised versions of the manga, improving things like art pacing, proving that to him this was a labor of love. Let's hope that that doesn't have a side effect in the long term. One and Murata published the manga in Shueisha, and after the explosion of the manga, they began to explore the possibility of an anime adaptation. An anime adaptation of one of Jump's titles is usually initiated by the publisher, Shueisha in this case, not directly One or Murata. The publisher will look for studios and production committees. So Shueisha started putting together one such committee. They would be handling the publishing, Wits Media, Bandai Namco, and Lantins would be covering music distribution, and the animation studio, the last piece of the puzzle, was Madhouse Productions. And leading the charge was Shingo Natsume, being brought in as a director. The planning for the anime began in early 2012. Natsume was relatively young, but he had already directed my favorite anime of all time, Space Dandy, The Small World. But because of the impact and the respect he gained from his peers, it was clear that he was a good choice, because he was the key to making this anime the giant it became. He personally reached out and invited outside help from studios other than Madhouse, a practice sort of unseen at the time. These were animators he personally trusted to make the project the best anime he or they could dream of being a part of to create. Animators were taken on as freelancers, and this freelance setup allowed Natsume to grant these talented animators their creative freedom, and this choice elevated the action scenes to cinematic levels. Unlike your typical tight anime schedule, the first season of One Punch Man didn't feel rushed, and that is thanks in part to the rest of the team. This high-level creative team ensured visual coherency, dynamic camera angles, and vibrant color palettes that resonated with Murata's original artwork. But one of these people, I think, shines a little brighter than the rest. Kubota managed to make animation-friendly designs for some of the most difficult characters in the story. Genos is a metallic robot that fucking glows and has insanely sharp details. The fact that none of that detail was lost is a genuine achievement. Even if the average viewer won't appreciate it, I do. Thank you, sir. Another element I feel often is overlooked is when it comes to the first anime's insane soundtrack and OST. The composer, Makoto Miyazaki, created a mix of orchestral builds to heavy rock paired with electric beats. And sound director, Jojo Hata, responsible for the sound effects and audio mixing. These two were responsible for the task that had no foundation to stem from. No webcomic or manga. One Punch Man had never been given sound before. This is genuinely such an impactful element of the anime. Every time I watch it, I'm surprised how much it impacts every moment of every experience. Music swells during fights, but cuts just at the right comedic moment, mirroring the narrative style itself. An example, Saitama casually realizing that it's grocery shopping sale day or whatever, and he one-shots the big thing that's killed everyone. The OP and OST are bombastic, but the ED is soft and melancholic. This reflects the show's dual nature: absurd comedy, existential melody, and Jam Project's involvement. There's no need to even say anything about the opening. It's so unbelievably powerful, and their legendary status as a group gave the opening itself the mainstream appeal. All of these people helped create something truly special. But One and Murata, although not directly involved with the animation itself, were consulted on story fidelity and were asked for approval for elements that needed to change due to the change in medium. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's almost exactly the approach that One and Murata took on when creating the manga itself. When it came to production, I couldn't find too much on how One felt or what impact he had as an individual. But once again, Murata was openly supportive of the anime in interviews and was happy to take a more hands-off approach than he usually would. But the dream team of animators from Madhouse followed Murata's manga almost panel to panel. So in truth, the anime was an adaptation of the manga and not the webcomic, which makes sense when it comes to the popularity and success and most likely the longevity of the anime. But it is sad to see that the webcomic was seemingly left behind in this transition. Natsume's freelance dream team, Kubota's animation-friendly designs, IKEA's art direction, Hashimoto's color work, Fushihara's cinematography, and the Miyazaki and Hata's soundtrack combined to give One Punch Man Season 1 something that was incredibly rare in TV anime. This granted the anime an ability to break out of any one genre, becoming accessible to nearly every person on the planet. And this success was seen. Season 1 DVDs sold 2,000 to 5,000 units each week upon its release in Japan alone, peaking at 12,000 in a week across its run. Extremely strong numbers for a long-running shonen in Japan exclusively. Before the anime, the Murata remake of the manga had sold 2.2 million copies by late 2013. But after season 1 aired, the sales skyrocketed. In 2016 alone, One Punch Man sold 3.9 million copies, ranking it as the 9th best-selling manga in Japan. Even though the anime was based on Murata's artwork, rather than the artwork from the webcomic, the anime's popularity retrospectively brought more attention to the rough, humble, and charming webcomic, much like this video is doing right now. It was around this time where I was in a classroom, overhearing people talk about this cartoon about this bald man. And after watching it, I fell in love. I dove right into the online hype. I started glazing the new hotness, and all I had experienced was hype to see where this everlasting momentum would lead. It's only up from here, baby. I lay the groundwork, covering the origins of the creation of One Punch Man across the webcomic, manga, and anime. Because in this video, I want to dive into something thicker. The 3 very different groups of One Punch Man fans, each with their own understandable reasons for why they think the series has gone off track. My goal isn't to pick sides here, because genuinely, I sympathize with everyone here. It's to separate the reasonable from the unreasonable, and hopefully find where the story could improve if we look at it from all angles. This video is part of a bigger series I'm working on, so if that interests you, make sure to subscribe so you won't miss the next and final chapter. Fall. When a story rises as quickly as One Punch Man did, it's almost inevitable that expectations will eventually outpace the reality. Think of Attack on Titan or Tokyo Ghoul. Shows that either had no time or took too long, respectively upsetting their fans, who want a loyal adaptation of their story in a timely manner. In One Punch Man's case, what began as a quirky frustration of shonen stories, taken webcomic form, evolved into a blockbuster manga, and then a world-spanning anime. But just as fast as the series climbed, cracks began to show. The fall wasn't immediate, it was slow, and different groups of fans noticed it in very different ways. There was not just one reason or fault, it was because of many reasons from all 3 sources of the story. We must trace the key factors behind this decline. The poor reception of season 2, the slow pace and redraws of the manga, the tonal shift away from the webcomic, and what caused this polarization, this division within the fanbase itself. This civil war I see in my comment section that I first started seeing after I posted my video on the 2nd season. The poor reception of season 2. Yabe. As I said in my last video, season 1 was carried by many things, but above them all is our director, Shingo Natsume. He assembled an all-star freelancer animation team, granting them creative freedom to do what they wanted. The budget, genuinely, was nothing special, but their passion resulted in an explosion. If you want to know more about that, just check the previous video. But when news broke that Madhouse would not return for season 2, serious fans got nervous. Although most anime watchers had no idea what it took to create season 1, the devoted people who were following maybe even from the webcomic or manga knew that this was not a good sign, and those fears were confirmed when the production shifted into the hands of JC's staff. A studio with a solid track record of competent work, but not one known for its kind of draw-dropping animation, but for comedies and slice of life shows. This genuinely could be a very good fit for One Punch Man if it could manage to get the fights to a decent standard. However, they were given very little time to prepare. JC staff had to step in late in the process, not only inheriting impossible expectations from season 1, but without the production pipeline, schedule, passion needed to meet those deadlines. But what they were given was the task of following up the most anticipated anime of the year and maybe the decade. The result was an anime that felt fundamentally different. The animation was flatter, choreography was stiffer, and even the comedic timing that JC are known for was weak here. Fights that should have been dynamic instead looked fairly static. Example, the tournament arc. Even if you could forgive the drop in visual quality, the same energy that made season 1 so special simply wasn't there. When we look at the changes between season 1 and 2, it's not hard to see where things started to flip. If we break down the staff list, the pattern is obvious. In season 1, most of the big named animators weren't tied down to Madhouse. They came in because they respected the director. He was the magnet that pulled in top freelancers from across the industry. But when Nasami left, so did those connections and those animators. Not because they had to, but because the reason they were there left. He wasn't leading the charge, and the fame that they all got from the success of season 1 made them very desired employees on other projects. That is the first major crack. Now, to be fair, not everything changed. Some genuinely massive and key roles stayed the same. Tomohiro Kazuki still handled the composition. Makoto Miyazaki returned to do the music, and Chiyazaki Kobara returned as character designer and chief animation director. On paper, this should have helped maintain the consistency. The soundtrack still had some bangers, and Kubot's designs are technically the same as season 1, but that's not shown in the anime. The biggest issue was the execution. That's where it fell apart. Under a new director, Chikara Sakurai. There's no point in mentioning every single element where the anime fell short because it's clearly visible in the product. But let's be real, whoever decided to make Genos partly CG deserves a lifetime ban from anime production. It completely killed the sharp mechanical detail that made him impressive in season 1. So on one hand, the talent wasn't entirely gone. Some staff stayed. The music was still amazing. Jam Projects returned to do the opening, but without Natsume's leadership and anime connections, the soul of One Punch Man didn't carry over. This obviously hurt One Punch Man's brand. Just look at the perspective and audience perspective. A really large chunk of the audience in this moment realistically checked out. They waited 4 years and they were met with disappointment. I covered the anime's fall in more detail in this video up here if you want to check that out, as I won't be able to go into as much detail as I want on the topic here and now, as this is just one of the many wounds One Punch Man had to bear, and the second and most possibly severe are the issues residing within its manga. The redraws and slow pace of the manga. While the anime-only fans are mourning the drop in quality, manga readers were dealing with their entirely own frustrations. Yusuke Murata's artwork is legendary. No one can say otherwise. His spreads are breathtaking and his monster designs are intricate, and his fight scenes are practically animatics. But that perfection comes at a cost. Last video I mentioned Murata developed a habit of redrawing chapters, not just panels, but sometimes entire sequences. While the improved art was impressive, it meant the story's pace was slowed to a crawl. Readers would never be sure when the next chapter would appear, or whether the one they had just read that moment would be replaced days later with a revised version. It made it so a fan who was reading week to week would have no idea whether what they just read was canon. He wouldn't just redraw the harsh art and paneling, but often would revise the story itself. Now, one thing, it's unclear as to why. Whether it's because Murata is a perfectionist or because one requested the changes to the story. These changes did deviate from the original source, from the webcomic. So the normal response is to blame Murata for the change in story. But I would like to remind everyone watching this video that one's name is still on the manga as a writer. And with that comes the responsibility of the story itself. If it changes and the webcomic readers are disappointed with those changes in the manga, then one is the person to blame, not Murata. Although Murata might want to make changes to the story and make tweaks, one is the one signing off on those changes. There has been zero evidence that I have seen to suggest that one has fully handed over the story of the manga to Murata. So before you go off saying in the comments that he ruined One Punch Man, that in mind. However, this doesn't change the fact that there are changes in the manga and that there is consistent retcons. As a weekly reader now myself, it is infuriating reading through the entire ninja arc, for example. A section of story that has 3, at least, timelines that had so many moments that I would read the next chapter just to realize it had started from a different location at a previous chapter. So I would have to go back and read the last chapter, only to find that 2 chapters had been revised. This made it exceedingly difficult to discover what I was supposed to read. And of course, I can sympathize with anyone who that frustrates. But the question is now, how this affected the greater One Punch Man's audience and reputation. This created a strange kind of tension within the fandom. On one hand, fans admired Murata's dedication to quality. I personally enjoy his spreads infinitely more than many other manga I've read. But on the other hand, the consistent start and stop rhythm that makes it difficult to stay invested in the story. For casual readers, it must be exhausting. For diehards, it sometimes felt like the manga was sinking in development and retcon hell, always being perfected, but never moving forward. It was at this point in the script where this thought crossed my mind. None of these issues actually affect the majority of manga readers. Now hear me out before you start yapping in the comments. If you're reading the physical volumes as they come out officially translated, you're never going to come across any of these issues. Those official volumes are going to have the perfected timeline. So the reader won't experience any of this. Hell, most people who read the One Punch Man manga aren't going to be affected by this. It's only us, the small minority of people, that have to put up with it because we read week to week. Probably the healthiest way of looking at it is that the on-run releases of the manga are like early access games. Sure, there might be things that you adore that get removed because they didn't pan out the way Murata or One wanted. But unlike early access games, we know that One and Murata have a very good track record of actually delivering a premium product. So isn't it worth the wait? The tone shift away from the webcomic. The webcomic, rough as it looked, moved at a consistent pace over the past 10 years. Not a fast pace, I would remind you. One's only managed to get out 60 chapters in these 10 years. This almost exactly matches the pace of the manga. I saw a few comments saying that the manga had more releases, but that's not really true at all. Regardless, characters in webcomic develop naturally, and arcs reach their conclusion without redraws or delays. This is the story that comes straight from the source, from one's unfiltered and unburdened passion. Not changed to fit a formula, not trying to chase perfection. The manga lost many frustrated readers simply trying to enjoy the story due to this. And this leads to the issue of tone, perhaps the most divisive problem of all, as we move to the next type of fan, the webcomic OGs. The tone of the original webcomic was brilliant and messy. It goofed on shonen with cruel simplicity. Villains were terrifying until they weren't, and arcs ended really abruptly. like almost all the fights as well. Characters died in ways that were shocking and often anticlimactic, played for laughs, but the humor came out not just in its gags, but in the sheer awkwardness and direct dialogue. Some of these OGs think that the manga adaptation shifted that balance. The story, for the most part, is still there, one-to-one, no pun intended, and in an attempt to match the writing, Murata made everything bigger. Think of it as like the Americanization of the webcomic. Think about a quaint commercial Japanese car, and when you bring that to America version, it's bigger. When you think about European McDonald's, there's a nice little burger and some chips, and then you bring it to America and it's bigger. And I'm not saying that's bad. I love the One Punch Man manga, but it's certainly different. A lack of excitement for the new anime. All of this leads us to today, where the future of One Punch Man feels strangely uncertain. Season 3 has been announced, but no concrete details are scarce. The trailers we've seen so far, if you can even call them trailers, are faithful-ish to Murata's manga designs. But, as I said, ish. They lack something. They feel different. But they are an improvement from Season 2. If you want to understand how shaky One Punch Man's decision is right now, you only need to look at the conventions this year. On the surface, it looks like the celebration at Anime Expo 2025 in Los Angeles. They, even broke a Guinness World Record. Over 1,000 fans performed Saitama's Serious Punch in unison. The Japanese and English cast showed up, and Jam Projects made their return, and even one himself sent a special message thanking fans on paper. But this wasn't necessarily for the 3rd season, it was for the 10th anniversary. And here's another problem. There wasn't a trailer, and there was no confirmed release date. No real production details. After waiting years, fans were expecting at least some answers, and they were left with funny meme epic times at the expo. Well, fun, I guess. They didn't actually tell us, the audience, anything about Season 3. It was the same story at Anime New York City later that summer. Jam Projects performed live there. The panel hyped up the upcoming season a little bit, and there was a behind-the-scenes crew preview. Nothing to do with the product itself, but to do with the crew. But again, no solid information, no clear staff list, no animation to prove the series is going on the right track. Even at Anime Japan in Tokyo, One Punch Man barely had a presence. Just a booth under Bandai Namco with some figures and posters and a cutout that you can take your picture with. For a series that once dominated the conversation, that kind of quiet promotion doesn't feel encouraging. The most concrete thing we got was the announcement of Season 3 is targeting in October 2025, something we already knew. And that brings us back to our 3 groups. The truth is, all 3 groups are right in their own way. The manga purists are right that the tone has shifted. The manga loyalists are right that the perfection has slowed the pace of the story to a crawl. The anime fans are right that the adaptation quality dropped off a cliff. None of these issues exist in isolation. They feed into one another. When the manga stalls, so does the anime. The manga moves at the exact same pace as the webcomic. That's not a coincidence. That's why One Punch Man feels stuck, at least to me. Not because the story has no future, because the foundation is fractured. Each group of fans wants something different. And instead of uniting under a shared love for the character and the world and the story, this division to me only seems to be growing louder. So who's to blame? Is it one for letting the manga deviate? Is it Murata for chasing perfection and distancing itself from the original work? Was it JC for fumbling the anime? Or is it just the curse of impossible expectations? A story caught between greatness and disappointment, hope and frustration, and a rise and a fall. The then and now. So what of the future? The future is one of the most terrifying elements when you are considering One Punch Man. In this video, we're going to be covering what we know about Season 3, and we're going to look at the future of this series in general, through the webcomic, manga, and then finally, the anime. One Punch Man came to this world as a dazzling, shining light, but now that light is dimmed, and much like Death of a Star, we don't get to see its collapse until years after it happens. The new director. Shinpei Nagai is taking over as director for One Punch Man Season 3. He replaces Shikara Sakurai and marks the third director the anime has had across 8 seasons. Nagai keeps a relatively low profile, much like the original author, One. Nagai only revealed himself to the world in early September 2025, 1 month before the anime is due to start airing. And up until this point, we've known nothing about the anime's production, and the past made it clear that the role of director can make or break an anime. Season 1 and 2 of this very anime make that clear as day. In that very relevant example, Shingo Natsumi, acclaimed, action-minded director, also known for Space Dandy, my favorite anime. But in terms of One Punch Man, he's known for rallying that elite team of freelancers and applying them around a clear vision for the anime, with a focus on clear visuals and production. Kuro Sakurai, on the other hand, he's a longtime animator and episode director who stepped up to the series director when the show moved onto a different studio and Natsume left. He actually worked notably on Naruto, but under his direction, he dropped many department heads when it came to season 2 of the anime. This alone showed that there was a lot of friction within the production of season 2, and that alone is a terrible sign, and the result was what we got. Season 1 was built like a showcase. Natsume leveraged his deep freelancer network to pack episodes with elite animators that pushed hand-drawn, kinetic cuts, old timing, comedy, and cinematic compositions to fights so that they felt like set pieces. This was only possible because of his connections and his personal passion for the project. And someone who didn't have that same passion and network was Sakurai. His TV style workflow, meaning fast and cheap workflow, it leaned more to in-house resources rather than the multi-talented network that Natsume had built for season 2. But why? Well, it was easier due to the production being in-house. It had safer staging and CG processing to support the action and supposedly keeping characters' art consistent in theory, but yielding flatter, less event-like battles and talkier, more conversational visuals. Season 2 prioritized production stability and continuity, but these two approaches are very understandable and logical even. But when expectations were set so high, this safe approach that they took really showed in the long term. Moving back to our new director for season 3 though, fans have been worried about season 3's animation since season 2's reception. And because JC Staff is again producing season 3, when the director revealed finally dropped alongside October's air date and a brief teaser, skepticism jumped both over the teaser and a deeper look into Nagai's resume. So what exactly did he post? Over September 3rd and 4th, he introduced himself on Twitter, apologizing for staying anonymous. The quote, "Hello everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Shinpei Nagai, the director for One Punch Man Season 3. I completely understand everyone's reaction. Please calm down and hear me out. The team is giving it our all on site. I can't discuss production details, but I'm open to answering what I can within limits." He clarified that he's been a freelancer from the start and not a full-time JC staffer, per this thread. Only now being a full-time employee for the project, brought on because of this new hybrid workflow. The idea is that he is bridging 3D and 2D to squeeze out even one more second from every schedule. Essentially, backgrounds would be previs and modeled in 3D, over which they would add a 2D layer composition. He says he's been refining this approach for years. He clarifies that he's been a freelancer from the start and not a full-time employee of JC Staff, per this thread. Only now becoming a full-time employee of JC Staff, being brought on because of his new hybrid workflow. So what do we think of this? Personally, I think this sounds amazing. The 3D assets from season 2 are not the reason that anime failed. They were actually overall quite good. So the fact that they planned on using it on backgrounds is good, and it's an amazing idea, and we have seen success with these methods before. When it comes to tone and setting, there is few that hit any more than the production team responsible for Apothecary Diaries. OLM and Toho Animation Studios used 3D layouts as assets, not shortcuts. It gave 100% accuracy when it came into locking scale, lenses, and light, so that 2D line work stays elegant, while the palace and greater world feel strictly designed. It's stylization with architectural accuracy. This can be seen in their workflow. The world would be built in 3D and then after painted in 2D. The team produced over 100 background models for the inner palace, 95 delivered by OLM Digital for season 1 alone. Then they would paint over and relight them for the final shots. This resulted in shots that had ornate decor and stayed internally consistent to a degree of 100%, while the 2D art direction and style remained front and center. That being said, this works great for a grounded show like Apothecary Diaries. And One Punch Man can take a lot of notes from this, in terms of environmental geometry and architecture, but One Punch Man is an action show. These methods can't be used to help with action, animation, and workflows. It's a good thing I've brought another example then, huh? Haikyuu The Dumpster Battle. Production IG asked CG Studio Gemba to build the match in a 3D layout first. We're talking 700 to 800 cuts planned in 3D. Players positioned, rotation, ball paths, and the camera rides through the court. Only after those shots were locked in did background painting and 2D character animation roll in. That's why rallies feel coherent, even when the camera is flying through. Roughly 2 months to lay this out. So Gemba built custom tools inside 3D Max to move faster. They blocked players with biped and then dropped in a pose library for spikes, receives, and hand forms. So layout artists didn't remake volleyball poses from scratch every single time. They also scripted auto rotation from the coat's rotation charts, temp nameplates that faces the active camera, and handy eye level exporters that paste straight into After Effects, so the comp team keeps the camera horizon consistent. This resulted in less grunt work and more time for shot decisions and overall quality in drawing. Haikyuu planned this whole match in 3D first, then drew the emotion in 2D. One Punch Man Season 3 can do the same for the Monster Association arc. Plan the chaos in 3D, perform the drama in 2D. They could build the labyrinth of the Monster Association and the city chunks in 3D layouts. Model the Monster Association HQ corridors, caverns, and areas, plus key City Z blocks. Treat them like real sets, real lenses. Lock in camera paths, entrance, exits, and elevation changes first, then start drawing. Let's take a look at 2 early fights and see how well this workflow might work. Flashy Flash versus the ninjas. Plan in 3D block the tunnels, corridors, and vanish/entry points, where these 3 characters enter and leave from. These movements can be tracked to give us those after images. Path each ninja's line through the maze that is this destruction. This will help stop the blurry problems. Every teleport reads as intentional. Keep viewers knowing who's where as the chase weaves through the hideout. And this is so easily done because this fight takes part in one area. Sure, that area gets destroyed, but that's what the 3D rendering is for. The next fight would be Child Emperor and Phoenix Man. Once again, build the vertical shaft. See, that fight takes part in so many different rooms that break into another room, then break into another room, and then fall down to the depths of the Monster Association. Each break, each area can be staged and pre-vised in 3D so that it is so clear that we can see a strong and linear path through the fight. It also lets you pre-visualize the mech. It's going to be a bit of an issue, right? Because the mechs change as the fight continues. So it lets you know exactly how big it's going to be so that you know how to plan the shots. Like how big a hole the mech would make in this wall. Who knows? Also, the parts that fall off the mech are easily tracked because you just go, oh, by the way, this part is off now. We can literally take this part off the mech and leave it on the ground here where it lands so that if it is somehow in frame, the artists can draw it. This is going to help with every element of movement. The mech's stride length, jump arcs, and, as I said, the smash through the walls. They can time Phoenix Man's flight lines and the insane level of speed movement seen in this fight. It helps with every single element of drawing. It gives you character poses and clear guidelines for where each body part would go. If Dragon Ball Super previs their shots, Vegeta would never have that weird ass hand. This can make the workflow so much easier from a production standpoint. JC staff can pull this off with the added guidance of Shinpei Nagai. It could have the insane impact and overall quality that we all desire from this season 3. I mentioned earlier that Nagai was the director for season 3. He hid his identity until very recently when he introduced on Twitter. He then goes on to explain the unusual secrecy in his words. He was relatively unknown. Without a roster of credits as an animator, he was worried that revealing his name too early would give a bad first impression for the show. So he personally asked to keep it under wraps. And now, on the eve of the release, he apologizes for that choice. This message wasn't done for status or something like clout. It seems to come across, to me at least, as damage control, but delivered with humility and just being genuine. Obviously, the secrecy breeds skepticism. Part of this simple resume I mentioned earlier, some of Nagai's best directional credits are short rom-coms and ecchi products, not big action-driven shonen. And when you put that next to the gold standard that is Madhouse Season 1 and the mixed and hollow reception of Season 2 by JC Staff, anxiety spikes when JC Staff are taking Season 3 again, and we get this teaser, a staticky PowerPoint mess. The secrecy didn't help. Even with his explanation, hiding a credit until a month out reads to too many as lack in confidence. Weakness. That's the climate he's walking into. Shinpai Nagai has been the front-facing heart of this anime so far. The guy single-handedly is pulling One Punch Man's name out of the mud when the promo cycle felt silent. He's the one who stood up and showed a spine. He stepped up publicly, answering questions, tempered expectations, and he remained composed in front of all this hate and speculation surrounding him, the anime itself, and its production. Anime is a team sport. Composition, color, AD, the whole pipeline. But leadership sets tone, and Nagai's tone has been set clear. Humility and grind. Because of the terrible publication of this anime, he has felt forced into 100 jobs instead of being just the director. On Twitter, he was everywhere, fielding questions, acknowledging limitations, and citing at some points that he couldn't answer certain questions due to NDAs. That openness matters, and I really appreciate it as an individual. It built so much trust and hype within the fandom. From where I'm sitting, getting multiple direct replies on my tiny Twitter account told me everything I needed to know about this guy and his priorities. He wants to keep us, the fan base, informed. He wants to steady the ship that is the public perception of the show he's making, citing that he wants to let his work speak for itself. Now, this is a course correction for sure. Season 2 left a bad taste in people's mouth, and Nagai met that unrelenting storm, not with defensiveness, but with receipts. And later we got the second and revised teaser for season 3, and it had everything we asked to be fixed. This was a promise that they would prioritize readability, mood, and bring us something truly special. He never claimed that they could copy season 2 punch to punch. He literally said that he can't live up to that. Instead, he reframed the goal, making choices that respect the scenes they're in, keep fights legible and cinematic, and he's honest with those restraints. And because the fanbase has been left with nothing because of the publication, not because of JC Staff, I cannot be more clear on that. JC Staff probably working above and beyond, right? It's the publication, Shueisha, that need to get their head on straight, because this man alone and the input he has had is doing more hype than anything they've done in the past 5 years. And yes, he's taking all the heat for this. He knows the publication is trying to protect him in ways. He said so publicly, and he knows that these gaps between the promo is going to be filled with frustration, and yet he's in there, in the trench. He's still there, answering, absorbing, redirecting, putting us at ease. He's not just filling the role of PR. He's building tone before the anime even comes out. You can see the fanbase thaw in real time. Replies turning into support, people lifting him up so he can better perform as a director. It's a rare case of frontward facing leadership that I honestly didn't really realize could actually be an option for a director. So JC Staff and Shinpai Nagai have my utmost respect when it comes to whatever they publish. And will that final product fall short in places? Probably. The real test is like action cuts and how those 2D to 3D pipelines we talked about earlier will perform under the pressure. But because Naga showed up, because he talked to us and listened to us and adjusted where he could with that feedback, hope isn't copium in this case. It's earned. That's the difference between being a deluded fan base and actually just having trust in someone. Thank you, Shinpai Nagai. You already know how much I appreciate what you've done so far, but hell, just keep it up. If you strip away all that noise, all that hate, his pitch is straightforward. He loves One Punch Man. He even singled out a theme from One Punch Man about choosing to be a hero who isn't praised, saying he saw himself in it. He's asking people not to judge his work until it's on screen. And he's framing the season's look around clarity first. Lock in the geometry, the lenses, the 3D, and let the 2D line work carry the faces, timing, punchlines, emotion, and comedy. If this approach can maintain balance, as all things should do, but then we're going to be left with something, honestly, really special. We'll see the results starting October 5th, or maybe 14th, because the first episode's supposed to be recap. About the redraws. Love them or hate them, they're not apathy. I love using that word. Then Murata's being a perfectionist. He has a documented history of reworking vague stretches, including Gara era material. He does this to improve clarity and tone, or staging, and that tracks with interviews about how he and One go back and forth, even scrapping pages to protect characters' intent. An example was when they decided to keep Boro more dignified than he was in the webcomic. In short, the manga is not going to stop because of Murata, but losing interest is probably where One Punch Man is going to fall. If anything, it could slow down long term. It's likely that it wouldn't be Murata, but it would be One's webcomic pace, because that's the well the remake of the manga ultimately drinks from. Historically, the webcomic has had long gaps. It had years of pause before 2019. And even in recent years, that's normal for One, because he's been juggling projects that he works on during the year. And he works on One Punch Man when he has the time. But for 2025, it's alive and kicking. We've had 3 webcomic chapters in March, May, and July, and that's a healthy output for like a manga or webcomic. So to take that One never updates a webcomic is also a misconception. But why am I spotlighting One here now? Why do I have One under the microscope? Well, because you gotta keep in mind, Murata approached One to redraw the story in the first place. The remake exists to upscale the source material, not to outrun it. When the webcomic slows or changes its direction, the manga either has to wait or redraws to realign to the story. That's how this partnership was set up from day one. And you know, I really hope that there is a reinvigoration of One Punch Man when season 3 comes out. Hopefully it brings One to new heights in terms of the manga, giving Murata the steam he needs to continue the manga as fast as he possibly can. All of this is obviously projection. We're talking about the future here. We're talking about chapters that don't exist yet. But it's not unfounded or, unreasonable to speculate something like this. Bottom line, for right now and for the foreseeable future, One Punch Man isn't over. It's just paced. The webcomic is the foundation. The manga sits on that foundation, with Murata's perfectionism, sometimes to a fault, but often and more consistently to our benefit. If there's ever a collapse, it would start where the source has dried up. Not because of Murata stopped caring, or anime season 3 failing. So until One finishes the story naturally, or simply loses interest, expect chapters in bursts. And if season 3 thrives, that's only gonna help us get more One